Hello and welcome to another episode of Geopolitical Cousins. I am producer Jacob. Jacob and Marco hop on here for a fairly quick episode, at least for them, to discuss the end of the Iran-Israel war, Trump's claims of obliterating Iran's nuclear program and the geopolitical implications of such. They talk about the media's response. They talk about the potential for this conflict to spill over into other parts of the Middle East. And then they touch on other developments from the NATO summit, from the U.S.'s relationship with NATO allies, and the U.S.'s growing tensions with Asian partners like Japan and South Korea. That's all I have. Be safe out there, and here we go.
All right. The cousins together. Marco is joining us off of a big client call. I have a big client call in 50 minutes, so we don't get to luxuriate in our normal hour and a half. We gotta give the people what they want in 50 minutes here, Marco, or let's call it 55. We wanted to do a postmortem on the Iran-Israel war. We wanted to talk about how, the news cycle is already on to the next thing, the crazy things happening at the NATO summit, which there's actually a lot to unpack there. Everything from how the Europeans are treating Donald Trump versus Japan and South Korea, and some of the things happening on the sidelines, or some of the things not happening on the sidelines. Where do you want to start? What do you want to say first? And I'm wearing a tie because I was just on with our friend Emre for his CNBC program. I know you did it for them, earlier this week or last week? Time has no meaning anymore, so that's why I look nice.
So I think we keep delaying our trade value. I'm very disappointed about this. We're so excited to do top 30 political leaders, the draft board, but we're going to have to delay it a little bit more. Obviously, I think we should dedicate this to the postmortem of what just happened. And so where I would want to start with first is there's this big debate, and I find this fascinating, Jacob. There's the big debate whether or not the nuclear program was obliterated. President Trump obviously claimed total obliteration, and then there was a leaked report from the Defense Intelligence Agency, which, by the way, that's, I think, a story in of itself. Why is the intelligence community leaking a report that's top secret on their assessment, other than to embarrass the president?
Well, or probably for the same reason that there was a decoy group of bombers that went towards the Pacific. And yes, I'm sure that some of it is to embarrass the president. Some of it is also probably, we don't know who is in Pete Hegseth's WhatsApp groups right now. So, very real, like non-zero chance that you could be getting, information somewhere,
Yeah, fair. So look, but I think it's a fascinating point, because this idea that the Iran nuclear program was set back by mere months, I think is just patently ludicrous. That is objectively just impossible. And I find it hilarious that some Democratic members of Congress are latching onto this because their Trump derangement syndrome is so severe that they're actually now becoming warmongering neocons in order to embarrass President Trump. So you've got this guy in California who I don't even know what his name is. He's completely irrelevant. He's from LA area, Ventura County. You can look him up. But he came out and said, you see, we didn't do enough. It's okay, so are you calling for greater war with Iran? It's where are we headed? Look, where I want to go with this is this. Saying that the attack on the nuclear program did not 100% destroy the nuclear program is like saying that the COVID vaccine is not 100% effective. It's yes, that's a fact. COVID vaccine is not 100% effective. You can still get COVID. You can even still die, but you should still probably take the vaccine. And so the reason I say this is because it's very similar to how, for example, the Joe Biden administration was kind of suggesting that the vaccine really is super effective, and so was Trump. In a way, because policymakers are just saying, look, this crisis is over. This is the solution we got. It's the best one we have. Just shut up and take the vaccine. Similarly, right now, I can objectively tell you from everything I know about geopolitics, military affairs, and how science works, is you cannot 100% obliterate the nuclear program. When Israel did it in 1981 by bombing al-Siraq in Iraq, did it obliterate the Iraqi nuclear program? Well, George W. Bush would say otherwise.
I mean, they did both in Iraq and Syria, but that was because they were at a much, 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 much earlier stage of the
But they didn't,
process. There
though.
was like one.
But they didn't.
Well,
No,
they
there was
never
no.
found evidence of nuclear weapons in
They
Iraq.
didn't find nuclear
That was
weapons, but there was a nuclear program. And the reason for this
yeah.
is that a nuclear program is not a building. A nuclear program is a holistic combination of factors, including human capital, fixed capital, some tools, some toolboxes. And so saying that the underground chambers of Fordo are still intact, it's like, number one, there's no electricity to place. It's probably going to take them months, if not years, to get back into those chambers. And if they moved the uranium out of the chambers, this is the part that I just think is so unfair to Trump. They moved the uranium because you warned them. The Israeli intelligence knows where the Ayatollah goes to the bathroom. If they moved the uranium, the enriched uranium, out of the underground caverns of Fordo, it suggests to me that they're now out in the open and we know where they are. Like, relax, everyone. So yes, it's objectively correct to say that President Trump was being hyperbolic, but that's like accusing Trump of being hyperbolic is like accusing him of being orange. This is just how he is. The reality is that it's destroyed enough. And that's a fact. It is destroyed enough.
Yeah, I'm interested in why you're focused on this point, because total obliteration to me is the exact same thing as mission accomplished. Any president who pulls off a military operation is going to have to take a victory lap. No matter, like, the job is not to be accurate about what they did; it's to say something happened and it was successful. I think you're right. The Democrats just can't find their way out of a wet paper bag. They had one sharp tool that they were starting to use. It was that congressional measure on halting U.S. involvement based on war powers. And they got a Republican from Kentucky to sign on and sponsor the bill. But he decided, since Trump stopped bombing already, that he didn't want to do it. And so the speaker's not going to bring it to the floor. And the Republican from Kentucky, Thomas Massie, his name, is not going to push it forward. If the Democrats really want to play here, you're exactly right. The wrong thing to do is to say, oh, nothing happened. The right thing to do is to say, hey, this started with the Democrats with Truman in the Korean War. We are the original sin of it. We have to get Congress back in charge of when U.S. military forces deployed, because whether it's President Trump or President Obama or President Bush or President Truman, we opened up Pandora's box, and Republicans, you need to work with us to shut Pandora's box. And that's Steve Bannon, Tucker Carlson, all of you. We want all of that's
Yeah.
free advice there to the Democrats. If
That's-
you want an issue to play on, it's not going to happen overnight, but that is the issue.
Yeah, so this is
you should be banging.
So Jacob, that's a great point. Like, if you want something that's anti-Trump and that's bipartisan, go join up with a MAGA camp that didn't want the attack in the first place. They didn't want to be Israel's tail. They got wagged by Benjamin Netanyahu's dog. That's what, if you have a problem with this, but it seems like the Democrats just can't quit the neocon line. This is like Kamala Harris campaigning with Liz Cheney, which is hilarious to me. They just don't understand the country has moved on from this. So the media, and by the way, I get journalists tweeting at me well, Trump started it by claiming that it was total obliteration. Oh yeah, that's why you're leaking Defense Intelligence Agency reports that's why. That's why, because of semantics. No, you're just so deranged with the Trump derangement syndrome that you're willing to basically take the stance that he didn't do enough, and therefore we need to go into an endless warfare with Iran over something that clearly has been set back by years, if not decades. So,
yeah, but would you say, do you think that it was necessary for the U.S. to bomb Fordo and those other sites to set it back? Because I think Israel had already set it back meaningfully.
Exactly.
I'm not sure what else the United States did. And so then, I want to agree with you and disagree with you at the same time, because I think there's a problem with the media, and that there is Trump derangement syndrome. But there's another part here, which is what the Trump administration was pushing. And I'm not saying this pejoratively. It's just an objective fact. And multiple administrations of both stripes do this whenever they do a military operation. They just do it in a different style to suit their base. It's propaganda. The whole thing of total obliteration was propaganda. And it is a journalist's job to question propaganda and to try and interrogate truth. And so if the justification for bombing the Iranian nuclear sites was we're going to obliterate the Iranian nuclear program, and then you get the propaganda, it is a journalist's function to push back against the propaganda itself. And I think that's where Trump gets into trouble, because they made it about the nuclear deal, when I think what really happened, and we talked about this, was Israel struck Iran. Trump, in Fareed Zakaria's point of view, had that FOMO foreign policy, wanted to look tough, didn't want to slap the Israelis down in public. And so he created this thing and went forward. And so I think you're right that the media is focusing on the wrong thing in that sense. But I do think there is a journalistic function to say, okay, we get it, like total obliteration. But that wasn't even the point in the first place. There's this relationship with Israel going back and forward. And there was that one reporter who got Trump to say, I don't know if you saw this, I'm sure you saw this. I mean, this was incredible, where he basically, they asked him if he was mad at the Israelis for violating the ceasefire. And he said, these two countries have been fighting for so long, they don't know what the fuck they're doing, to quote
exactly.
him. And I honestly wanted to stop it right there and be like, let Trump be Trump. Get rid of all the advisors. Like, that's the best foreign policy brief on Israel-Iran relations I've heard in years. They don't know what they're doing. Like, just like, stop, guys. And I think all this other stuff around him gets in the way of it.
Right, but that's where the criticism of the semantics is idiotic. So no, I think if you're a journalist attacking the total obliteration, you're not, I mean, yeah, sure, you're doing your job, but I still think you're an idiot. And here's why, because because who cares? Like, he didn't, like, yes, was it necessary to drop this massive ordinance on Fordo? I mean, on some say, yeah, objectively, why not? Why not also do that en passant, since Israel already started it? But the real reason that was done is so that the U.S. gets leverage over both Israel and Iran. So, and that's something he can't publicly say.
Right, and it's the job of the journalist to try and get that, and if not to unearth that from him to
but they're not doing that.
Else.
But they're not doing that.
No, I agree. That's why I said agree and disagree. Like, I don't want to throw out the function of journalists while also criticizing like how the journalists are doing things. And it also, like, in that very narrow sense, like, you and I are trying to do what journalists should be doing. Like, instead of like some part of our job, instead of analyzing what's going on, we also have to be truth seekers. It used to be you could rely on journalists to a certain degree to try and ascertain truth, and then you could take a step back and do analysis. But our job has gotten infinitely harder, because you can't even trust the truth function that the journalism is sending out, because it's, depending on who the reporter is or what outlet they're with, they have all these other different things. I also want to push back against one. Okay, no, go ahead, and then I'll push back on something.
No, finish. Yeah.
Just the uranium thing. I don't think I don't think it's quite that simple. Like, uranium doesn't breathe. It doesn't make phone calls. These cylinders can be stored in, my understanding is that they can be stored in things that are basically, 55 pounds roughly. So something that you could theoretically get out and like send it in a bunch of different directions. And if we don't know where it is, or if it has been moved all over the place, then you're absolutely right. Not only does the Iranian nuclear program still live, it can be given to other groups. It can be given to terrorists. Like, where is it going to end up, especially if we have regime change in Iran that is coming? We'll get to that in a second. Like, the question of where the uranium is one that is a little bit disturbing to me. And I'm not sure that it's quite as easy to track down a 55-pound canister of stuff, especially when you're tracking, I don't know how many of them. Is it like 16 of them or something like that, enough for 10 nuclear bombs, rather than just tracking one 86-year-old dude who probably can't be too far away from the bathroom for too long without something bad happening?
I would push back massively on that. Look, I mean, Israel has destroyed radar installations that also don't breathe. They've destroyed, they've known the movements of all the different scientists. I mean, it's just the reason Fordo is important is because 80 meters underground, you can store something in it. Once you have to pull that out of that, that's where it's out in the open. Do we know where the 50-pound, bag of enriched uranium is right now? Do we know? Like, no, but we will find out. Because one thing we know for a certain is that this country leaks like a sieve. Like, the Iranian the Iranian government leaks like their navy does. So I'm just not too concerned about that, because it's this idea that it's now disappeared. Well, it was in Fordo for a reason. It was protected there. Now it's out in the open. Yes, there's a element of mystery of it. I am personally comfortable with that level of mystery. And what Trump is basically saying by using hyperbole is that he just doesn't want to hear any more arguments about this. And he really is not talking to American audience. He's talking to Israel. He's saying,
Yeah.
like, listen, stop using your sources in American media to leak government government like reports so that you can build a case for an endless war that we're supposed to wage on your behalf. That is what's being said, I think, with President Trump. And I find it interesting that nobody's picking up on that. There's this like cacophony of voices that's saying, like, well, no, we need to do more. The same voices in some cases, particularly on the journalist side, who 2 weeks ago were saying the US should not get involved. And I think that that's what's interesting to me, this flip-flopping on how to make Trump look bad. And yes, you're right. That statement in front of the White House as he was boarding the plane, saying to both sides, like, they don't know what they're doing. I think that that was a clear signal, and he actually went after Israel really hard. So the reason he
Mhm.
bombed Fordo, the reason the United States bombed Fordo is to tell Israel, like, okay, we did it. That's it. And we're not gonna, you got us into this. Well done. Chapeau. Like, well done. But now it's game over. And in particular, I think that this is something that we discussed on the podcast as well. The longer this conflict went on, the leverage U.S. has over Israel increases due to the munitions. I focused on the offensive munitions. Wall Street Journal did a great job. There you go. I can also give props to journalists. They did a great job about 10 days ago where they focused on the stockpile of defensive munitions, particularly the Arrow missiles that intercept ballistic missiles. And so, yeah, Israel is running out. And so now President Trump's leverage is increasing, and he's effectively telling Israel, like, okay, that's it. That's why
Yeah.
U.S. bombed Fordo. Not necessarily because there's 100% effectiveness, but I would again argue that's also a bar that's just way too high. How are you going to kill every single human being in Iran who like has taken a physics course? Like,
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a pretty high price to pay for what the United States accomplished in Iran. So maybe we put a pin in it on this. Like maybe I give you my scenarios going forward and you give me scenarios, and then we can turn to NATO, because in some ways, I mean, that's like the new thing, and in some ways more important, I think, globally, and especially for our listeners. But I've got 3 scenarios left on my sheet right now, and they're all about Iranian domestic politics and how Iran responds to what just happened to it. I think the most likely is status quo, that the regime survives. Like, it showed impressive resilience considering everything that happened to it. The mark of a strong regime is actually one that's able to take a punch and then counterpunch, and that's what they did. They took a really, really hard punch from the Israelis, and then they refocused and they reorganized, and then they started hitting Israel and making it hurt. So that shows me that there's some resilience there that maybe was unappreciated.
interesting.
I think there's also a scenario where we go full North Korea. The Russians didn't help us. The Chinese didn't help us. Nobody helped us. We're just going to lock it up, full on authoritarianism, nuclear weapons as quickly as possible. Like, we are the hermit kingdom of the Middle East. Or there's the neocon wet dream, which is the people rise up, liberalizing regime.
Sure.
This will be an ally of the United States going forward. But the reason I say it's a high cost to bomb Fordo to get the Israelis to stop, and they didn't even stop. I don't think the Israelis think that they need to stop. If anything, I think they are convinced that they could do whatever they want now. Once, okay, let's restock the munitions, and we can do this again in 12 months because we found the yellow cake. It moved from Fordo to this other site, so we're going to hit it again. I can hear it going already. But in all of my scenarios, Iran sprints to a nuclear weapon quicker. I think that was the cost of this. You've basically just given any future Iranian regime, even one that is liberal and friendly to women and homosexuals, like, they will also still want a nuclear weapon, because the United States, unlike in Russia, Ukraine, unlike in India, Pakistan, unlike in any of the other conflicts of the past couple of years, like, this was direct U.S. involvement, and a different conversation has to be had in foreign capitals and in analyst circles in those different cities when you're talking about the threat of the United States and what the risks are and how to sort of deal with them. So what's your takeaway?
Yeah, I think broadly I agree with everything. What I'm fascinated by is how this regime is just really not monolithic and hasn't been.
Hmm.
1980 to 1988, I keep going back to the Iran-Iraq war, 500,000 people died. Everyone's on Saddam's side. I mean, everybody, Soviet Union and America are aligned together against Iran. How does Iran respond after 1988? Do they triple down on isolation? Well, actually, no. They take their licks, like men. gendering, sorry. But they take their legs and they proceed with actually a period of opening to the rest of the world in the 1990s, which is weird because they did also support terrorism at the same time. So you have the Buenos Aires attack as an example, which clearly was linked to Iranian regime and Hezbollah. But the presidency of Rafsanjani was quite moderate in the 90s, and it led to some opening with the rest of the world. So, I wouldn't be surprised if your first scenario where the regime survives, which is your base case, also includes a domestic internal pivot. I mean, look, if you're a member of the Iranian elite right now, first of all, you got completely punched in the face. Second of all, you're looking around the region. What are other countries doing? They're taking account of their demographics. Like Saudi Arabia woke up one day and was like, look, I mean, 70% of the country is under the age of 35. Like, what are we doing here? And so I could see a similar sort of not North Korea scenario, but rather the opposite. Taking a page out of the 1990s, where President Rafsanjani was actually quite, like not liberal, but quite reformist. I mean, he actually ended up supporting the 2009, opposition, which cost him obviously his political career.
And it's a really important point because an historical analogy, and all historical analogies are fraught and imperfect. But I think what happened to Egypt over the second half of the 20th century is actually somewhat explanatory. You can explain the opening in the 1990s because of the unique nature of the Islamic, of the Iranian Revolution, which was they set up parallel political structures. There was the clerics protected by the IRGC. The job of the IRGC is literally to protect the revolution. Now they've expanded into Hezbollah and everything else, but their original purpose was protect the revolution. And then you still have quote unquote democratic elections in Iran, and you have civilian politics, and they are not the same thing.
Yes.
And the IRGC was always supposed to be separate from that. And what happened beginning with President Ahmadinejad was that the IRGC started metastasizing into all these other arenas of the Iranian state and economy that they weren't supposed to. They were supposed to stay in their box and protect the clerics and protect the virtue of the revolution. Then they slowly started swallowing, businesses, the economy, even like the external military functions that were supposed to be with the Iranian military. And you get to the point where the IRGC controls like something to 50 to 60% of the Iranian economy by most estimates right now. So no matter what happens, unless you kill all the IRGC, which is not possible, the IRGC is going to be there. And I make the analogy to Egypt because think of what started in Egypt with Gamal Abdel Nasser, a coup, a charismatic politician who gives this Arab nationalism and socialism, and he dominates for 10, 15, 20 years, whatever it was. But when he dies and, eventually Sadat is assassinated because he makes peace with Israel, it's the Egyptian military that takes over. Now, Nasser was a military officer himself. But when you look at Egypt today, it's a military dictatorship and one that is relatively stable, but the military is calling the shots. I think that's maybe the model here if you're the IRGC. It's like we've already taken over the economy, thanks, A-Dog. Now we've got all these other things. The supreme leader's about to die. We'll put in a figurehead. We are going to dominate. And once we no longer have to watch our backs and we're completely in control of this, we can behave like Egypt does today. We can go out and deal with the world in general. Like that I think is a path forward for them.
And that's the irony, Jacob, because General Soleimani, who was assassinated by the US, was on his way to doing that. I mean, there were rumors he was going to run for presidency. He was extremely popular just in Iran in general, charismatic guy, very successful in the insurgency against the US in Iraq. And so then he was assassinated, and IRGC kind of lost that face. But you're right. There are many others. There was a mayor of Tehran, I forgot his name, who was also IRGC commander in the past life. There are models of this that can definitely emerge.
It doesn't matter who it is. It's an institutional dictatorship rather than this weird bifurcated, half democratic, half theocratic thing. So I think the Iranian Revolution dies with Ali Khamenei, and it becomes like a military dictatorship, just like any other military dictatorship in the world. If it's the status quo, of course, there's that neocon wet dream lurking in the background, but that was always a Hail Mary.
And I think their military dictatorship will be very rational. But to your point, military dictatorship will obviously want to pursue a nuclear weapon, given what just happened. And so I do think that the negotiations are going to be very interesting. The United States of America has to now really think about what it can give Iran in order to avoid them going for the breakout. Because the thing is, U.S. still does have leverage, and the leverage is like, look, we just figured out your S-300s don't work. You have no air defense capabilities. We can mow the grass, every couple of years if we have to. Every couple of years that you get a little bit more sophisticated on the nuclear program, we'll just mow it down. So, I do think there can be a grand bargain between the two. And this goes back to my point from the last podcast we did. An amoral foreign policy allows the U.S. to make those kind of deals with rivals that it disagrees with in terms of how they treat the population or whatever. And that's where I think it could be a coup of grand proportions for President Trump to really show his chops in negotiation. If he can create a grand bargain with Iran that ensures that whatever that regime evolves into, it doesn't produce a nuclear weapon.
Yeah, I've been thinking more about that point that you made. It is a high bar, and I've been thinking more about that point you made about the amoral foreign policy. And actually, maybe President Trump is the right person for it. That White House thing he did, where he was castigating both of them. Like I said, I wanted to isolate him from all his advisors and all the polls and everything else, and just be like, if that's your instinct, like that's the instinct I would like start with. If I was starting the briefing with you, that's the sentence I would start with, and then we would go to like what your goals are. Like, really great. So you already know it. You don't need to listen to cousins, President Trump. That's fine, but you have to sell that to the American people. And the American people and his base are not amoral. And you saw this in the Ted Cruz interview. You saw this in all of the talk around this going into it. This is not amoral at all. If anything, it is super moral. It is righteous. It's part of, especially in, very important part of the base of without which Trump doesn't have anything. So in the same way that FDR had to sell foreign policy to the American people and wait for a moment which he got something, like President Trump is constrained by the same things. He cannot just snap his fingers and say, I'm going to be amoral, and then go to the base who are just like, well, wait, we thought this was part of the soul. So I'm just saying, like, he is subject to the same constraints as any American president.
I know, but I think the median voter has moved on. So I think that President Trump is far more in line where the median voter is, then and I think who is President Trump's base? Is it the sort of moralistic neocons like Ted Cruz, or is it the MAGA camp? Which we've seen in some of the commentary over the past several weeks, where they are saying like, why are we in this fight? Why are we letting Israel draw us into their conflict? It's not talking about like, well, Israel is a democracy, it's a friend of ours, it's a lot of things that people may disagree with, but it's a democracy that's the most liberal regime in the Middle East. Again, caveats here. I'm just saying what one might say.
Yeah.
And that MAGA camp, I think, is more in line with the Bernie Sanders voters. And I think that the median voter in the U.S. is becoming much more aligned with that kind of Machiavellian realpolitik foreign policy. And we've seen President Trump abandon parts of his base on different issues before, and this may be one of those as well. So that's what's interesting. But one thing, by the way, I just want to before we pivot to NATO and other things, there's two things I want to say. One of our listeners from last podcast criticized one of the points I made, which is that President Trump was, generally speaking, doing right things with this particular conflict in mind. I think that's proven correct by him going after both Israel and Iran. Clearly, he is amoral in this, but we should probably use a different term and just say he's being realpolitik, realist, whatever you want to call it. But one of our listeners was like, but wait a minute, what about leaving JCPOA? So yes, dear listener, you're correct. That was stupid. I will. That was unnecessary. There was just no need to leave JCPOA. Iranian enrichment was at zero. Yes, the deal would expire anyways. There was a moment where he could have renegotiated. There was a way to renegotiate. I mean, there was a way to impose more something, like get better terms, but leaving it.
And remember that was Trump 1, where he was surrounded by Bolton and the coterie of neocons who used the Iran issue both on the campaign trail to get him elected, and they thought they were going to use Trump as a useful idiot. And in the first term, I think he still cared about different norms and he doesn't now, for better and for worse. But he let himself be sort of taken along the garden path there, and he made that promise to voters. And if you're defending him, like, you can also say, like, yes, there was a deal, but after there was a deal, and part of the reason for the deal, by the way, was that ISIS looked like it was taking over the Middle East. Like, that was the background context for the United States and Iran looking at each other, being like, maybe we should, like, put this to bed for a second and deal with these crazy people, and then we can go back to what we were doing. Yeah, fought together because, like, they saw the bigger threat. So really what we need is ISIS to come back for peace in the Middle East, is what you're saying.
No, but I think ISIS was the basis of a lot of peace in the Middle East.
Yeah.
I mean, the reason that Saudi Arabia and Iran have détente is ISIS. Iranian linked Iraqi militant groups. So Iraqi militants who were supported by Iran and Al-Quds Force was calling in airstrikes from American warthogs outside of Baghdad to arrest the invasion by al-Baghdadi. So, like, I agree with you. There are far worse things, in other words, in the region than the Islamic Republic. One thing I do want to say, mention Iraq.
Well, no, well, hold on, just on the JCPOA though, because the other thing to think about the Iran nuclear deal is that, first of all, it was supported by two lame duck presidents who didn't have a lot of domestic support for it. So Hassan Rouhani was president in Iran at the time. He did not have a lot of support for it. The IRGC was at his heels. He was trying to push back against the IRGC and that thing that I just talked about. And then you had Obama, who was also on his heels with Iran. Also, after the JCPOA is signed and after ISIS is dealt with, the Iranians, yes, like, you can say that they were they followed the letter of the law on enrichment, but the deal said nothing about missiles, and they started testing ICBMs and all sorts of missile technology immediately all over the place. And so, like, if the JCPOA was going to be effective, there was more to a nuclear program than just the uranium. There's also the missiles. There's also all these other things. So they just kept on going full speed ahead at the other stuff and said, okay, like, we will get to the uranium when we get to it, because, as you've noted before, that's old technology. Like, they could probably get there. Like, yes, it's hard, but, like, they have a lot of human capital there. So if you really wanted a JCPOA, we would need to go back to the way that treaties used to be, which is supported by Congress, so that a future president can't just rip it up because he feels in a particular way. So the JCPOA was really, it was a weak effort by two weak presidents to try and set their countries on a path away from what we just saw. And because they didn't have the requisite support, it didn't work. And whether it was a failure, like, maybe whether they should have done it because it was the best they could have done, or they should have just accepted that it was not realistic and done something else, I don't know. But I think that context is useful. So, like, yes, he shouldn't have pulled out of the JCPOA. He could have built up on it, but there was no way that the Trump one was going to do that. And also, the deal itself was not going to prevent the Iranian nuclear program from going forward. Like, that critique is accurate.
That's a really a well-founded defense. Look at how the roles have flipped. So one thing I want to say, your scenarios I have no comment on, so they're fine. The one thing that I think we should think about, though, is I think it's objectively clear that the Iranian regime has weakened, not domestically. So this isn't a point about regime change, but if you are allied with Iran, and there are fewer and fewer of those around the Middle East, but if you are allied with Iran, you are worried. And in particular, what I'm worried about, and this can be the last point we have for the postmortem, I'm worried about Iraq.
Yeah.
You know, Iraq has a basically a balance of power. It's very important to Iran. It's their buffer against a lot of different challenges. And currently, it's being run by effectively Tehran-linked Iranian militias, Shia militias, and Shia politicians. Now, there's different groups of Shia politicians in Iraq. The nationalists, who are opposed to Iranian influence, effectively gave up. In 2021, I thought a civil war was going to happen. And then Muqtada al-Sadr, the leader of this faction, who fought against Americans on behalf of Iran, but then flipped and became pretty ardent Shia nationalist, opposing Iranian influence in Iraq, he retired. At the end of 2021, early 2022, he just retired.
Yeah.
And that was part of, good for him. I think he took a job at Brookings. He writes a column for the Wall Street Journal.
The Muqtada al-Sadr chair for geopolitical analysis coming to a think tank near you.
Militancy and liberalism. A discourse.
This will obviously be one of the fake sponsors that we read in future episodes. I can't wait to write the copy for that.
No, but that'd be awesome. So Muqtada al-Sadr just retires, and And I suspect part of the reason is that Saudis pressured both Muqtada al-Sadr and the Shia nationalists in Iraq. Look, we have a deal with Iran. We're giving up Iraq to them. God bless them. They can take it. We want to focus on economic modernization. We're done with this Shia Sunni stuff. You don't care. And so for the past, 4 years, Iraq has been surprisingly calm, surprisingly stable, because that side just gave up. What happens when that side realizes that maybe they don't need Saudi support because Iran is weak? Now, I think that would be a mistake. Iran may not have the technological capability to fight against Israeli fighter jets, but it does have the technological capability to support an insurgency in Iraq. Those are two different things. You're not fighting Israeli fighter jets. You're fighting a war door to door. That's something Iran has done in Iraq for the past 20 years. Nonetheless, this is something that I'm worried about, Jacob. Like when I think about the post-mortem of what just happened, I do think this ceasefire is highly sustainable. I think President Trump has just smacked both Israel and Iran and said, I don't want to hear. It's like when I get sick of my kids fighting and I show up and the son is like, she started it. I'm like, I don't care. If I have to come back up here one more time, she's like, you're both in timeout, and it's like Serbian dad is coming out, not Santa Monica dad. So that's what Trump did.
Did you see that somebody asked Mark Ruddy about Trump's language, and he literally said sometimes daddy has to use harsh language?
No, and then, I mean, it's like, that's exactly like, that's what Trump act like. I see myself in him, like with my kids. And it's, and so I think this is sustainable. I really think if Israel crosses Trump again, I think it's going to be very bad for the country. So that's great. But the negative is Iraq. And I really worry about the destabilization of that neighboring country. So that's it. Like that's where I'm at right now with this.
All right. And turn on the TikTok camera for one thing from I think this is the first time I've asked for the TikTok camera on. For all of you ardent Kurdish nationalists listening to this podcast, your time is now, and you might not get another chance. So if there's going to be an independent Kurdish state, like the dynamics that Marko is talking about right now, this is where they come from. ISIS used, a vacuum of power in Iraq to do what it did to build a caliphate. You can use a vacuum of power in these lands to build the thing that you're talking about. So stop squabbling with each other. And if this is something that you want, like now would be the moment. And if there is a plan in an Israeli drawer that says the next phase of this is not regime change in Iran, but supporting the establishment of an independent Kurdish state, which is something the Israelis have toyed with back and forth through their history. Like I will eat my lunch if this is part of some broader strategic plan. For the record, I don't think that's going to happen, but like if there was a moment for it to happen, like the power vacuum that you're talking about is it. Okay, there's I think of that as out there, but maybe people won't. Let's turn, Marko, to our last 20 minutes for the NATO summit. I want to read to you what Mark Ruddy sent. Is it Mark Ruddy? Rutt? How do you pronounce that?
I think it's Rutte, but our Dutch fans tell us.
Yeah, I'm trained in Arabic, not in Dutch. Sorry, guys. So I just want to read what he sent to Donald Trump, and Donald Trump posted this on his Truth. And I also want to say this sounds like he went to ChatGPT and said, could you create a message for me that makes Donald Trump happy? Mr. President, dear Donald, congratulations and thank you for your decisive action in Iran. That was truly extraordinary and something no one else dared to do. It makes us all safer. You are flying into another big success in The Hague this evening. It was not easy, but we've got them all signed on to 5%. Donald, you have driven us to a really, really important moment for America and Europe and the world. You will achieve something no American president in decades could get done. Europe is going to pay in a big way, as they should, and it will be your win. Safe travels, and see you at His Majesty's dinner. We should all be so happy as Mark, whatever his name is, to be happy to pay at the expense of the Americans. There's the European side of this, which we will get to. I also just want to say in the background here, big problems in U.S.-Japanese relations. Prime Minister Ishiba decided not to attend the summit. Japan also very summarily canceled a 2+2 meeting that was supposed to be July 1st. South Korea has attended the summit the last couple of years. They decided not to. And this is amid reports that the Trump administration is pushing for these Asian countries to spend up to 5% on on military spending as a percent of GDP as well, and trying to retrofit NATO into an anti-China alliance. So I think there's an Asia-Pacific angle to this. There's the NATO summit to it, and then there's just the sheer comedy of all of these European leaders understanding that kissing, being seen to kiss the knee is going to get you what you want. So no more isolating Trump off on stage left. It's like, hey, as much flattery language as we want. So take it from there, Marco. Let's do some cooking.
Well, first of all, I would say that any man would be so lucky that their partner looks at them and texts them the way that Mark speaks to Trump. May you live a long and fruitful life full of romance, and that it be filled with little cute notes of love and affection, the way that Mark texts Donald. That was just dripping. Like, dear Mr. President, comma, Donald. You
Dear
didn't
Donald.
read it. You didn't read it. You're speeding. You're rushing through this pod episode, Jacob. I
No,
know
I
we have
didn't.
limited time, but you have to
No.
do the cadence. You have to say, Donald. Pause. It was incredible, and the fact that Trump shared it with everyone was so diabolically mean. It's like he's acting like there's some girl that's texting him and he's sharing it with buddies. It's like, hey, look at this. Look at what Mark said to me. Like, I'm the man. So yeah, I think flattery is definitely working. Did you see that Pakistan nominated President Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize? Like, how did
I knew.
everybody else think of
Yeah.
it? Like, hey, hats off to Pakistan. Like, what a brilliant move. They nominated him and made it publicly. Like, we nominated President Trump. Like, not anyone else.
Well, and I believe they did it 48 hours before the Israel-Iran war started, or was it 48 hours before the U.S. decided to bomb Iran? Like, really
I'm
great.
sorry. President Trump bombed Iran. Not a single person died in that bombing, and now the conflict is over. Well deserved. I mean, like, truth. I mean, look, it's subjective. Like, but no, some journalists will say, but he used the term, it's been obliterated. Okay. That's why nobody reads media anymore. Anyways, going back to NATO. So your point, I mean, look, I think that it's interesting because President Trump has now said that it's an extraordinary success that they're going to hit this 5% target. Just to explain to everybody, I mean, nobody spends 3% on their defense, like, really, in the world. Like, nobody. The United States of America, I think in 2024 was like 2.7% of its GDP. I don't know if you will look it up, but like,
Oh yeah, I'll tell you.
look, getting to 3.5% defense spending as percent of your GDP is like double what's probably rational for most of these countries. Their target of 5% is false. It's not 5%. That's just PR. They're committing to 3.5% in defense, 1.5% on infrastructure, like, broadly conceived, where I can see, like, I think some of these countries are going to justify, like, improvements to their healthcare system as necessary for defense. So, let's just, and the other thing is that this is by 2035, a year at which, President Trump is highly unlikely to call him out on it. The world will be different. And so this is where I would say, yes, I do expect increase in spending in Europe, absolutely. But they want to increase spending in Europe for other reasons too. They want to do it for fiscal stimulus reasons. They want to just have their economies grow more. So they're not spending 5% of their GDP on military because nobody is, including the U.S. The U.S. isn't at 3.5% expenditure on defense.
Yeah. Well, first of all, about the spending on military, did you see what German Chancellor Friedrich Merz said about the German army?
Yeah, he was very.
Week?
Yeah, he was saying, like, they're going.
He said,
to
"quote that he wants Germany to have the strongest conventional army in Europe." End quote. Because that went so well the first time. Thank you, U.S. government, for encouraging Germany to return to the notion that it needs the largest army in Europe. I'm so happy about this,
Jacob. I'm sorry to have to correct your
Please
history
do.
knowledge.
No, I'm happy to be corrected. Yeah, please.
2 times it went great. 2 times, not once. By the way,
and I looked up military spending as a percent of GDP. There are 5 countries in the world that spend more than 7% of their GDP on the military. Let me guess them?
Okay. Oh, this is great. Yes, live. Let's see. North Korea is one.
No. Although
my
I don't,
God.
maybe they're not on here because we don't have data probably. So
Okay.
that's probably a good guess, but we just don't have data. So
Huh.
I,
Interesting.
I don't think the North Koreans are saying to CIPRI, yeah, this is how much we're spending on this. That's where I'm getting
I
this
mean,
data.
do they have data on Ukraine then? Is Ukraine one of
They
them?
do.
Okay,
Yeah.
so Ukraine is
Ukraine
one
is
of
by
them.
far and away number one at 34.5% is their calculation right now. So
Second, I guess,
what's
is
your next
Russia.
four?
Russia.
Russia is number five, 7.1%.
Okay.
So
Let
you've
me
got
think.
1 and 5 off the table.
All right. Is Sudan one of them?
No, I'll give you a hint. The rest of our countries are in the MENA region.
Oh, okay. Interesting. All right. Uh,
2 you should get, and 1 I would have never gotten in a bajillion years.
Iran and Israel?
Israel at 8.8%, number
Wow.
2, not Iran, but our Saudi friends at 7.3% at number 4. And coming in at number 3, 8%, Algeria.
Oh, that would be okay, but that's why. Those are salaries, benefits.
Okay, but still, like it's still 8%.
Hey, by the
So,
way, that's an
and
important point. Sorry, go ahead.
no, you go.
No, one of the things, the easiest way to boost defense spending is just to give people in military higher salaries. And that's in a lot of North African countries like Egypt or Algeria. Like
Burkina
Algeria,
Faso, your favorite, on this list at 4.7%.
yeah, like a lot of that is just like, it's the sclerotic economy and the highly entrenched interest of the military elite. So I would say that's not like Algeria doesn't really have a military that is equivalent to how much they spend because they don't spend it correctly. But yeah, the point is,
the only other country on this list that spends more as a percentage of GDP than the United States, and by the way, Colombia tied with the United States in terms of how much,
and what was it?
3.4%, but 3.4%
Also, U.S.
for the
spends
United States and Colombia.
3.4% of GDP.
3.4% according to
Oh,
this data. The only country that is not in like North Africa or a place like that that's high up, to your point, is Poland at 4.2%.
yeah, that's right. Poland does spend the most. So look, the point of this is like 3.5% is a lot. It's a lot. The U.S. is a global, superpower. It spends 3.4% of its GDP on defense. I'm not sure that Portugal or Italy, it makes really any sense for them to do the same.
Well, and you probably saw that Spain has
Yeah.
secured an exception so that it doesn't have to do this. I actually put on our internal research platform at work that, is this the end of NATO here? If you're going to start carving out exceptions for different countries, and if some countries are going to are worried about defense, so they'll say nice things to Trump and others won't. And already the Asian economies are like, all right, we flirted with this for a while, but why should we do this? And the bombing of Iran, I think, sort of reinforces this.
But here's my argument for that. Here's my argument for that. So like, does it make sense for Canada to spend 3.5% of its GDP on military? Why not get Canada to build refining, processing centers for critical minerals? So if you're trying to create a Western alliance, like maybe you should start by ensuring that it's not Chinese rare earth minerals in your missiles. Maybe that's, I don't know. Like I'm just a stupid geopolitical strategist. But if your missile is built with like 70% Chinese components, maybe part of the military spending and security should be that. So like, I'm not sure that it makes sense for every country to just buy more fighter jets and tanks. Instead, you can look at critical advantages that other countries have. Canada, as an example, has a lot of natural resources. It has some processing of these complicated minerals in certain parts of Canada. For example, in Trail, British Columbia, a very interesting piece of Western critical infrastructure, one of the largest lead processing centers that also does some rare earth minerals as well. So like you could contribute to the Western effort, if you will, without just giving salaries to colonels, to meet the 3.5% line. And I fear that that's what's going to happen. A lot of countries like, Belgium, what are they going to do? Like, hey, should we buy more fighter jets? Should we buy more tanks? That's all really difficult. It's just like double everyone's salary and we'll satisfy Donald Trump. That's where I think this is a little bit too like rote. But
You're betraying your globalist credentials, you global philic, apolitical analyst. The point here is not to import refined materials from Canada and some of these other places. First of all, Canada is supposed to be part of the United States in this metaphor. The
yeah,
goal here is to make really, really good, shiny military equipment and sell it to the rest of the
well, and
world to
break
balance
them.
the trade balance and make these U.S. military industrial companies. We're going to do the refining here in the United States too. So, and by the way, in your one big beautiful bill that you think is is fiscally conservative, like where we're increasing spending on the military budget so that we can sell those guns and those weapons to all these other different countries.
Well, that would be
We all hope that you enjoyed the Fordo air show that we put on here to show you some of this wonderful bunker busting technology that we will be offering to the world. It's like Dwight Eisenhower is rolling in his grave.
no, I mean that's so. Yes, I mean a lot of this is just I the media is covering this as if it's a fait accompli. It's all these countries have until 2035 to do it. I think that they will do it in many ways, but they won't spend it really on defense. And so, it's just aligns with political interests of everyone. President Trump can now say that he got Europeans to do something nobody else did. Europeans can satisfy their own domestic political logic by boosting their economy. But I don't expect every one of these countries to spend as much as the U.S. The other thing, though, that I would say, what is significant, Jacob, is that a lot of people went into the Trump presidency expecting him to withdraw from NATO, that he's, like not committed to NATO. He now, after this Brussels summit, I mean, the words he's using, he's now like committed to the pot. He's saying this was his achievement. He's put his stamp on it. We know how President Trump's ego works. He's now, as far as the next 3 years of his presidency go, and perhaps beyond, like he is now pro NATO, and that's, I think, the big picture here. Like President Trump is not going to pull out of NATO, and that's kind of a sweet spot for Europe, where it both has Friedrich Merz out there saying we need to rearm, and at the same time it still has that American umbrella because he doesn't seem to have qualified it at this summit. Unless I'm wrong.
Well, and another betrayal of Trump's principles, like America first. We're not going to defend the Europeans, but we are going to defend the Europeans via NATO, and the Europeans are going to be strong again. Maybe they'll rename it TATO, the Trump Atlantic Treaty Organization. That sounds sort of good.
If they were smart, they would.
Well, and this is why we started with the media, and then we start to close in or start to land the plane on the media, which is the way the media is covering this thing is they're saying, "Ooh, isn't it so gross and odious that all of these European leaders like Mark are texting Trump and treating him like this king? It's the courtiers and everything else." And it's like the story you should be telling is, of course they're doing that because that's how you get things out of the man. I don't think anything has fundamentally changed here. I think the Europeans and all the South Koreans, Japan, they've all woken up and realized that the United States is not reliable or dependable anymore. Now, they can't flip the switch and just turn on the United States immediately. They still need things from the United States. And as much as they can get things from the United States, they will. And if you are going to deal with Trump, you either have to be big enough as China to punch back and willing to absorb the pain, or like get ready to kiss a lot of Trump butt, because that's the way you get to him. You say really, really nice things to him. You flatter him, all these other things. So the way to cover that is these European leaders are actually getting the things they want out of Trump, things that are against the things that he's campaigned on before, by saying really, really nice things to them. So you may feel that it's odious because you don't want to say things to leaders like that, but you're a journalist. If you want to report on what's going on here, report on how the Europeans are playing him, and report on how Japan and South Korea are basically being like, we're not even sending PlayStations. What the F? You just bombed Iran and you want us to just show up and do things because you tell us to? You can't even decide, how much you want us to spend on military or what tariffs you want on or off. We're leaving the meetings until you can figure something out. Like, I think this is actually a big signal that multipolarity is accelerating and US strength is not what it used to be. I think you can say that exactly about the Israelis too. Like even Trump saying, stop the bombs, like having to scream, stop the bombs. Like nobody's listening to this guy. They're just all flattering him.
I think, there's limits to every argument, and I think multipolarity is clearly in place. Otherwise, Israel would not have attacked Iran without much of a warning to the US, without really involvement. That would not have happened in a unipolar world. But at the same time, there's limits to that, right? Like the US, and this is always something that I always caveat, especially for American audience. a multipolar world doesn't mean that every country is equally powerful. That's not what it means. It's just that there's no one country with preponderance of power. But it doesn't mean that the US is still not the most powerful country in the world. It is, as President Trump said, the only country that can deliver a payload such as it was on Fordo from Missouri. Like, that's the only country in the world that can go that distance with that payload. And it's the only country that can tell Israel, after watching it for 2 weeks disobey the US effectively, eventually Israel runs out of rockets, to defend itself. And now the US is, now what? So, the problem with these arguments, Jacob, is sometimes people get too literal and too like, well, what do you mean? Like, well, it's nuanced. But in a unipolar world, like, this would not have happened. Either way, you're correct. I mean, it's a push and pull, and one of the things that will deepen multipolarity, like what will deepen it, is that Germany will have the largest conventional army in Europe, which will mean that it's one of the top 5 greatest military powers in the world again.
Yeah.
And that will deepen multipolarity.
I don't know if you saw. Yeah,
Sorry.
I don't know if you saw also President Trump just in the last, as we've been talking, has been just railing on the Spaniards for not agreeing to spend this much money. Spanish market's also down as a result. That I don't do much trading, but I'm pretty bullish on Spain in general. But I think that just reinforces what we're talking about. Like, if you're not nice to him, if you don't do what he says, like, he's going to do this to you. So, like, why wouldn't the Spanish government just be like, sure, we'll spend it, we'll do whatever you want, and then not spend it? Like, that's an own goal. Maybe they're powerful enough, or they're fine enough they don't want to. But yeah,
it's a total own goal. It's a total own goal, and the reason it's an own goal is because it's until 2035. Why would you stick your neck out? Everybody else fell in line. Not because they're afraid of Trump, but because why would you go through the trouble of fighting the United States of America on this? Like, the goalposts are so wide on this target that you can drive a brand new aircraft carrier through it. So, like, why push against it? And so, yeah, I would argue that, we have that top 30 leaders trade value coming up. Pedro Sanchez may have to drop a little bit.
He was, newsflash, he was not in my top 30. All right.
Anything
else, Marco, before we go? I got to get out of here.
No, that's it. I think the postmortem is done. Just as a summary, I think this it's nonsense to discuss whether the nuclear program is obliterated or not. It is highly, highly unlikely that Iran is going to get a nuke in the next 12 months. U.S. can mow the grass with further military strikes. And then the thing is regime survival, probably here to stay. The question is how it evolves. That was your point. And then finally, I would focus on Iraq. That's where I would want to watch for sign that Iranian weakness is going to lead to more destabilization in the region. And finally, in closing, what I would say is send your loved one a text. And if you need help with how to structure it, read Mark Rutte's comments to Donald Trump. They were very sweet.
Lessons on sensuality from a political nihilist. That's great. Rest of the world, please don't blow anything up so we can do our leadership column podcast next week. Like, give us a week here, guys. Jesus. All right.
Thank you.
See you later.